All right, we are going to talk about, in this class for the 9 weeks, American government. It is not a comparative government class. It is all about American government. Now, we will compare and contrast as opposed to other types of government philosophies, but this is an American government class. Therefore, we will teach it from the perspective of it being a good thing. When we get done with this class, you will see why it is a good thing, and perhaps, arguably, I am biased because I am an American and I have studied this for a long time, do believe it is the best system ever created by man. It is not perfect, but it is the best system that we have on earth. But before we study government, you first have to ask the question, what is civil government? That should be the first question that you always start when you're investigating something, is you start with a question. What is civil government? Does anybody want to give a try at explaining what civil government is? Say again? Yes, the notes are on the website. What is civil government? Okay, what does civil refer to? Because we have two words in here that we probably need to define a little bit. Civil and government.
Yeah, like us, basically. Like we are a civilization.
You're onto something.
I would say like it's not higher rank.
What do you, okay, keep going with that. You're on to something because you're seeing the root word here, right? Civil. Because you get civilization comes out of the root word civil too.
Civil like fair, like act civil,
Act civilized is what that means. That's short for civilized. So again, back to the word civil. Say again. Like an equal government? Sometimes, but not directly. Civil government. We already said civil. The root word of civilization is civil. So we're dealing with the civilization. Civilization of, or put it the other way around, government of civilization. We read it, unlike the Greeks. The Greek would say government civilized. We say civil government. Okay, if you ever read the ancient Greek, when it's translated from Greek to English, it's like hearing Yoda speak. Yoda speaks just like the Greeks would. Instead of saying red truck, you start with, it's a truck and it's red. In English, we start with what it is. It's civilization of government. When it's really what it should be is government that is civilized.
That's the definition?
No, not yet. What we're doing is parsing what these words are. Because we have a government in this classroom. I have classroom governance in this class. Typically, it's called classroom management. But the real word is, or words that should be used, is classroom governance. Mr. Hale has school governance. Mr. or Dr. Neville has school district governance. That is why I make a distinction for you to understand the type of government we are referring to. Okay, because there's lots of different types of governance. You have governance over your own lives. The government, well, we're going to find out about what the government is, because that is another discussion. But in general, what we're saying here is this: what is the civilized government or government civilized? What is that? That's what we're going to attempt to explain here. So one of the examples that I have already talked about, how the teacher has classroom governance over its pupils, over their students. The principal has governance over his teachers. The city has governance over the city operations. The law of gravity has governance over gravity. It is rules, absolutely. Rules and control. That'd be one way to look at it. The sovereign has governance over its subjects, whether it's the king or the president. Now, I'm using the word president generically, not in the sense of the United States. That's a very different position than president in general. Government, think of it as a math formula. Influence and power over someone or something is government. Influence and power over someone or something is government. Now, you don't have to write this next one down. It's in a very important quote. You might want to write it down, but I'm not going to require you to. It is a fundamental premise that our government system is based on. And it describes in a way that I think we're going to address, I don't think today, I think it's tomorrow, the fundamental problem with humanity. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal control of government would be necessary. James Madison, the founder of, or the writer of our Constitution. If men were angels, we wouldn't need a government. But since we are not angels, and since angels do not govern us, we need a form of government that restrains us.
What do you mean restrains us?
We'll talk about that. Good question, Jappe. That's a very good question. You do not need it, but it's actually a good quote for you to be able to use in your life to explain why we need government. We as human beings, why there needs to be a government system. What do you think of when you hear the word angels? Let's parse this apart a little bit. James Madison, one of the most brilliant men in that Constitutional Convention who established our country, says, because we are not angels. Why did he use the word angels? What do you think of when you hear the word angels? Perfect, right? Holy, maybe? Actually, if you read the Judeo-Christian Bible, there's only one thing in the world that's holy. In fact, so holy, it is repeated 3 times. It's the only place in the Bible that the Jewish writers ever repeat something 3 times. It'd be like us putting exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. When the Jewish writers write something 3 times in a row, that's called the superlative degree. It is the most important, and there's only one place in all 66 of those books, if you're using the Protestant Bible. I don't remember how many the Catholic Bible has, how many books they have there, but they have more. It's the only place, and they're referring to Yahweh as being the Holy One. But human beings see angels as probably the second level of holiness. They're the only pure beings, according to the Judeo-Christian teachings, that can be seen or can be in the presence of God. And even then they have to have their faces covered. The cherubims. But you're right. The overall picture he's painting us is goodness. Mankind is not angels. And therefore, we need some kind of form of government. This you will need. And it did not show up. Oh, there we go, at the bottom. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was down there. Government, first and primary job. Yes, will be on the test. You will have to recall this Many, many times in this class, I'm going to keep asking you, what is the first and primary job of government? Protect our natural rights. Yes. First and primary job of government, not to provide health care, not to provide welfare or housing or schooling or anything else that we get today. Government's number one job is to protect our natural rights. By the way, the only country that's ever believed that from its beginning is ours. And it's really the thing that separates us from any other country, is this belief right here. Now we're going to address what natural rights are in a little bit, because that should be your next question, Mr. Moffat. What is natural rights? Because I assume most of you, if not all of you, have never heard of that. We will be addressing that. It's important that you understand what natural rights are and that it is government's job to protect those rights. Yes, Harlan. Yes, those are natural rights. What's our first natural right, Harlan? Nope. Nope. There you go. There's the three top natural rights in our government form of system in our country. Life is number one. Government's first job is to protect your life. The second job is to protect your liberty. Now, it says in our Declaration of Independence, the third right, and remember they do say in there, there's others, and there are others, these are the three that they point out, it's the pursuit of happiness. That originally was property. It is recognized that property is your third natural right that must be protected. When we get to the Declaration of Independence, we will break that apart further to understand why it says happiness versus pursuit of happiness versus property. Understand, without government, you end up with anarchy. However, anarchy never stays in anarchy. No nation has ever remained in anarchy for long. The people, it will get so bad. Think about, how many of you know about The Purge, the movie The Purge? Yeah, it's still popular among your age group. The Purge, while everybody wished they could do The Purge, some reason they think they're the ones that's going to survive the 24 hours. Likelihood is you will not. The Purge would be 7 days a week with no end. You are not, as a result of that kind of situation, you will beg for a dictator to take over and get things under control. Anarchy always leads to dictatorships, with no exception in world history. Under anarchy, without government, no citizen's natural rights would be safe, and you would not be able to protect them. Physical force and brutality would trump over justice and reason every time. Might makes right under anarchy. Because I'm bigger than you, I can do what I want to you. Who wants to live in a society like that? Nobody in their right mind would. You have to have a form of government to live under. Now, true enough, one thing for sure is you are going to have a form of government to live under. The only question is it going to be a good government or is it going to be a bad government? And in our country, our system of government allows us to make that decision. Every time we go to the voting box, we get to decide whether we're going to have a good government or a bad government. We'll get more into that later in this class. So when you have good government, the predator class of people will be restrained and brought to justice. The movie The American Sniper, if you read the book American Sniper, Chris Kyle, his dad taught him, and it's a good analogy, there are three kinds of people in this world. You have wolves, you have sheep, and you have the sheepdogs. What's the job of the sheepdog? Protect the sheep. That's right. He's seen himself as the sniper overlooking the Marines. He was a Navy SEAL, Navy sniper, so he traveled with the Marines. His job was sheepdog, to protect his Marines. He's seen himself as a sheepdog to protect the American sheep. Those who don't go into, by the way, only about 1%, if that, ever go into the military anymore. Now they're even having a hard time finding people who's qualified to get in the military. Can't pass the ASVAB. Too many drugs they've been on. The predator class is what I refer to as, you can see, if thinking of it as a wolf works for you, great. The government is the sheepdog. Their job is to protect the rest of us from the wolves. Now, we have a fundamental problem with mankind. Now, let me reiterate. I'm going to be reiterating this all the next 2 quarters you're with me. I'm not telling you what you have to believe in the ways of theology. You have to understand, however, that the people that developed our Constitution, the people that founded our country, the people that lived before us in Western civilization did believe in this. And they acted in accordance to their belief. There's this fundamental problem with humanity, and it's summed up in 2 words, 2 Latin words, libido dominante, the lust to dominate. This phrase came out of St. Augustine's writings. Believe it was the City of God. If you ever get a chance, it is considered one of the Western classics. If you ever get a chance to read that, I highly advise you to do so. But in there, he refers to libido dominante being the problem of mankind. And this came from, it originated, this defect in humanity, this problem that we all have as human beings, originates from what is theologically called the fall of man. In the Garden of Eden, you have 2 individuals, Adam and Eve. They could eat anything they wanted, except for one fruit. We don't really know what it is. Often it's portrayed as an apple. We don't know what it is. Even the Jews, who this story comes out of the Jewish heritage, they don't know what it was, but it was the one thing reserved for God. Eve was deceived by the serpent, that we would refer to as Satan, that she could eat that and be like God. Being greedy that she was, oh really? She eats and then convinces him to eat. That ushered in what is called the original sin in humanity. And because of that original sin, human nature become corrupted. Corrupted with evil. Because of this defect in humanity, this evilness within human nature, we have a tendency, we as human beings have a tendency to want to tell the people how to live. And better yet, take what you have if you have something I want. That is referred to as libido dominante, the lust to dominate over someone else. That typically goes, when we're dealing with governments, goes into the form of dictatorships. In our country, we don't see so much of that, but we see taxation. as a way to dominate over us. We'll get more into that later. But understand, this is another test question, by the way. I'm going to ask you, what is the defect of humanity? What is the problem with humanity, and therefore we need government? You're going to explain Levito Dominate. You must watch out for Levito Dominate in all of your politicians, and all of the judges, and anybody who has control over your life. Over me. I have the power. This is what's scary, ladies and gentlemen. One teacher has the power to stop you from graduating. I can decide, for a large part, the future of you. If I decide to abuse my power as a teacher and allow Levito Dominate to run my life, you won't graduate. What do you think about that? Maybe some of you have already experienced teachers who have a problem with Levito Dominate. I remember in college, I had my advisor told our class, there are two types of people that go into teaching. One who actually wants to do something and help, and then the other type, he said, unfortunately, is the majority of them want to go into teaching so they can control other people. That's pretty scary to think about. But that comes right out of this idea, Levito Dominate. Watch out for that. Watch out for it in your own life when you get in a position where you can control things. You've got, and here's the thing, when you get into power, when we do our field trip to the State House and Representative gives us her tour, she will talk about that. How the first time she walked in there, in fact, the guy who gave her the tour when she was being introduced to her job, he said, put your hands on this pillar. We're downstairs. She said, on this pillar, feel the power in this building. She said it scared the crap out of her, realizing she represents, I think, 4,500 people in her district. She has the power to control. She could destroy lives by her vote. And she goes, the thing is, most of the people at the State House, they are sucked into that power. That's why term limits is a good idea. Because you get into that kind of power, you forget who you really represent, and you start looking out for number one, you. So, it's to me, it's a quite incredible story to have her tell it. She had no idea what these two words were. We explained it to her, I don't know, last fall. She goes, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened here when I put my hand on this pillar. It was a pretty cool lesson. The kids were like, holy cow, that's Mr. Muffin does know what he's talking about. All right, the word, I'm going to try not to read, I don't want to kill you by PowerPoint by reading what you can read yourself. The way the word government is used signifies the organized means and power that a state or nation employs to the purpose of securing the rights of the people. So it is how that word government is used will tell you how they operate in securing those rights, or worse yet, not securing those rights. So when you hear different words like democratic socialism, communism, Marxism, Nazism, fascism, statism, dictatorship, monarchy, limited monarchy, parliamentary monarchy, then every one of those things should come to mind. Once you learn it, you will learn it in this class. Once you learn it, should tell you the type of government you're dealing with and how they operate regarding rights or no rights. Just a quick question. How many of you think we live in a democracy? Raise your hand. How many of you think we live in a democracy? Come on, quick hands. Stop writing for a minute. I appreciate your wanting to write, but quick hands. How many of you think we live in a democracy? How many of you heard that we have lived in a democracy? Okay. So you guys have heard it. Do you not believe it? None of you raised your hands. Do we or do we not live in a democracy? We do not? Okay. Over here? Then why do they keep saying we are or we do? Almost all of you raised your hand saying you've heard it. Well, Natalia's right. We do not live in a democracy. You'll find out here in a few more slides if we have time today. But you will hear this and you will see this on your citizenship test. Excuse me, that we are a democracy. That is not true. That is not, and I'll tell you right now, we'll get there. You'd better pray that you do not ever live in a democracy. We'll get there. It all comes back to La Vita Dominante. But we'll get there. All right, do not write this down. Do not write this down. I am going to read it to you. Listen to it, though. This is referring to worldview. Remember what I said. You do not have to believe the theological perspectives of our forefathers. I'm not asking you to believe it. But we have to understand they believed it and they act in accordance. In fact, every one of you have a theological worldview. Even an atheist, which is a religion, has a theological worldview. Based on that worldview, you make all other decisions in your life. Without exception, everybody in the world makes decisions starting with what they believe from a theological perspective. And this author, Russell Kirk, if you ever want to read a good book on the foundation of the American order, the book, The Roots of the American Order, is a great one to read. But he writes on this, and he says, quote, all the aspects of any civilization arise out of the people's religion, its politics, its economics, its arts, its science, even the simple crafts are the byproducts of religious insights and a religious cult. For until human beings are tied together by some common faith and share certain moral principles, they prey upon one another in the common worship of the occult. And they're not referring to the occult as in witchcraft, but as in a religious practice. A community forms. At the heart of every culture is a body of ethics, of distinctions between good and evil. And in the beginnings, at least, those distinctions are founded upon the authority of revealed religion. Not until a people have come to share religious beliefs are they able to work together satisfactorily, or even to make sense of the world in which they find themselves. Thus, all order, even the ideology order of modern totalitarian states, professing atheism, cannot come into existence had it not grown out of general belief in truths that are perceived by the moral imagination. Everything that we have first started with a religious belief, with a theological perspective. So, again, I'm not telling you have to believe this stuff. I'm telling you what we're going to learn comes out of the people's theological perspectives. Okay? All right, now we're going to break this down. Types of government. The type of government people have is determined by the choices that they have made when they established it. And people who are ignorant of the principles of liberty will always be governed by tyrants and despots. Tyrants and despots rule without any regard to people's rights and the welfare of those people. I can point out to Hitler, to Stalin, to Pol Pot, to Saddam Hussein, to Assad, to the, what's the leader's name in Iran? The Ayatollah Khamenei, or whatever his name is, or his title. Mao in China. Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Those dictators could care less if 100,000 people or 1 million or 100 million of their people die. Santa Anna in Mexico, the dictator in Mexico that went to war against Texas, Providence of Mexico at the time that we now know as Texas, said the soldiers were just fodder. They're like chickens. Who cares if they die? Pretty typical of dictators. If you do not understand the principles of liberty, ladies and gentlemen, you are ripe for a takeover. Because if you don't know your rights, how do you know that you should even defend them? How do you know when you're being violated by your own government if you don't know your rights? How do you know if I'm not violating your rights if you don't know your rights? You know I can't just search you. Even if I have probable cause, I can't do that. Because you have certain rights, even though you're a minor in school. Doesn't mean you're going to stay here if you don't consent to a search, but I just can't arbitrarily, other than your water bottles, can't just go and start rummaging through your backpack or your pockets. What do you think that star means? Might be a question on the test. So what is a tyrant? Anyway, we used a word that you may not be aware of. Tyrant, absolute ruler. He is unrestrained by the law. The law applies to you. There's no law that applies to him. He rules with excessive, absolute authority. And a despot, which is the next one, is one that is exceeding power tyrannically. In other words, one who is exercising power like a tyrant. They are essentially the same, though people use them a little bit differently. I personally do not understand the difference, but understand when you read, especially like our founding fathers' writings, they will use these two words separately, often in the same sentence. So we know they're using it differently. Even when I look up, I have a copy of our country's first dictionary. Even when I look up the two words, they seem to be the same. They mean the same to me. So, but understand, there is two different definitions, though they sure do seem to be the same. Somebody who's a tyrant is also a despot. Still see pencils moving, smoking coming up from it. Where at there, Mia? Huh? Despot? Okay. Any questions at this point? What is the defect in humanity? What is it called? Two words, it's Latin. Say again?
I can say it.
Do you know how to speak Spanish?
Yeah, I know. It says love and
Yeah. Yeah, I can't get the accent, the roll, the way it should be said, but it's La Vida Dominante. That's how I say it. That's how this cracker says it. So, All right. Something you need to understand. Intelligence enables the citizen to make sound judgments affecting public interest. Our schools understood that in the 1800s, before John Dewey took over and some other progressives. In the 1800s, I actually have an 1876 civil government textbook. That's what they called American government at that time. There are questions in there that college students could not answer. It's actually an incredible textbook. One of the things it mentions in there, that it taught high school students that ignorant voters were more dangerous than an invading army. Ignorant voters were more dangerous than an invading army. Say again? That's right. We have so much freedom in our form of government, which is called a constitutional republic, that if we vote without reason and logic, but with feelings, we will run ourselves in the ground. Benjamin Franklin walked out after the Constitution was signed, well, developed, it wasn't ratified yet, and he was asked, Dr. Franklin, when he walked out of that building, what kind of government have you given us? And he responded back, Madam, a republic if you can keep it. They weren't sure it was going to be successful because it relied on the intelligence of the people when they vote on who they were voting for. And then those representatives having the intelligence to make the right decisions when it's time for them to make the laws. An ignorant voter was more dangerous than an invading army. All right. We are going to discuss, we won't finish it today, we are going to discuss, though, 6 principal forms of government. You will need to know all 6 if you don't remember your pretest. We're going to address 6 principal forms of government. Now, I could have made a list of 10, I could have made a list of 8, 12, but everything boils down into these 6, and then we're going to boil it down into 2. These are the 6 most common that you're going to hear. Then every other form comes out of these. You will be asked to list the 6 forms of government. All right, so we left off with the 6 principal forms of government. Now we're going to start taking them apart here. The first form, I'm probably not going to say this right, but it's patriarchal. It's the first and oldest form of government, and this is where it is the father that's leading or governing the home. One of the best examples we have in the last 100 years is the Lever to Beaver program. If you ever watched that program, you got Ward Cleaver, who is truly the leader of that home. This is traditionally how families have been. Like I said, it's the first and oldest form. If it was the mother that was the leader of the household, then it would be matriarchal. There are some sub-societies where it is the females that are the rulers of the home. And I say rulers not in a dictator way, but the one when mom talks, everybody jumps kind of thing. There are some subcultures that within within all civilizations, that's the case. So on the test, if I ask you what is the first form of government, now you know. What is the oldest form of government? Now you know. What is the characteristic of the patriarchal form of government? Father leads the home. So if you go home with your notes, Those are the kind of questions you can write on note cards to help memorize and understand this form of government. In our country, it was once believed, our founding fathers certainly believed this, that our national security rested on the moral sense intelligence and the intelligence of the people when the father was the true patriarch of the home. When he was home, doing what a father and husband should be doing, not being absent, running off, whatever. When he is home, guiding his family, guiding his children how to be good people, how to be good workers, that was going to provide the best foundation of a country's security, is the family, a strong family unit. Today, we call this type of family the nuclear family. It used to be called the biblical family. But civil government don't like to use theological terms. Not since about the 1950s, 50s and 60s, things radically changed. Okay. Now it's called the nuclear family because in the 1950s, the United States or the world went into what's called the nuclear age with the invention of the atomic weapons. And the 1950s has become kind of the golden years, the golden decade for not only America, but the American family. And then you had the Cultural Revolution in the 60s that we have never recovered from as a society. The second form is theocratic. There's a root word in this up here, theo. What does theo mean? Anybody have good, strong vocabulary skills? Theo is God. God-centered. There's only been one theocratic system of government, and that's Judaism. They started out as theocratic. Particularly with Moses. It started with Moses. The immediate direction and administration from God. God told Moses what to do. Moses told everybody else. He got his first commands from the Ten Commandments that if you read the Jewish history books, in Exodus, God wrote the Ten Commandments on 2 stones with his very finger. Now, I'm not saying you have to believe that, but under the Jewish custom, under their Jewish history, that's what happened, and that established the theocratic rule over the Jews, or at that time they were called Hebrews. Hebrews were ruled under this system for 1,500 years. And they changed to a monarchy with King Saul. And they had a king until after King Harold died, which I believe King Harold died, I think he died before Christ did. But if I ain't mistaken, he was the last king. If there was another king, he was such a weak king that it didn't matter. But and then of course, about 30 years later, year 79 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and sent the rest of the Jews all over the world. It's called the Great Disbursement. But for 1,500 years, the Hebrew people operated under a theocratic rule. All right. We're halfway through the slides, almost halfway through, but we're not going to get this finished before class is out. The next form is monarchical. Now you're quite familiar with this. This is a king. Government is administered by the monarch. Monarchs have the supreme authority over the people. They could be called kings, emperors, czars, sultans. They come by different names. They are all a monarch. By the way, this is King George III, the one that we booted out of here. So what is a monarch? It's the country, kingdom, empire, etc., of which the monarch exercises. The monarchy is the land, the zone, the region. The monarch is the individual. Maybe I need to say it that way. Do we still have this form of government today in the world? Absolutely. Yeah. But we're going to break England down even a little more precise. Yeah. Like we're done writing. Okay. Monarchs are divided into two power classes, absolute and limited. Remember I told you we're going to break down the Queen of England? We're going to break her down here. We have two power classes within a monarch, absolute and limited. Any idea what the Queen of England is? She's limited. She's probably one of the most limited of all the kingdoms that we have now, of all the kingships and queenships. The absolute monarchy. We get the ideal of absolute power, and more importantly, the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings, or is sometimes called the divine right, or God's mandate, is a political and theological doctrine of royal and political legitimacy. Wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to have separation of church and state. Not under this time period, not under this political ideal. This theory does not separate the two. They are actually intertwined so much that the king becomes absolute because God says so. It asserts the monarch is subject to no earthly authority, deriving the right to rule directly from the will of God. In China, they call that the mandate of heaven. If the emperor lost the mandate of heaven, there's typically a catastrophic event that occurs, like a major earthquake with 200,000 people dying at one time, or a mudslide or a flood where we're talking about thousands of people dying. That was a sign that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven and he was going to be replaced. And lo and behold, coincidence being, or maybe divine providence, depends what your belief is, that emperor usually ends up dying within months. No different than Mao when he died in 1976. 100,000 people died in an earthquake. 6 months later, he was dead. This ideal began with in the Judeo-Christian world in the ancient Hebrew book of 1 Samuel. The prophet Samuel anoints Saul, and then David was king over Israel. So what happened was Remember, theocratic rule, Samuel is told by God who to go anoint as Israel's first king. He was told to go see Samuel and anoint him, not Samuel, Saul, and anoint him king. He becomes king. He later loses the mandate of heaven, if I can use a Chinese term, for not obeying God. And King David, when he's a boy, the shepherd David, when he's a boy, is anointed king of Israel by the direction of God. The point where the divine right of kings comes in, even though David was anointed to be king of Israel, because King Saul was still in office, and though Saul was trying to kill David, David refused to kill Saul when he had the opportunity, citing, this is God's anointed. Nobody touches Saul. He will die on his own because he is God's chosen king. This is where the idea of divine right comes from. These kings, rulers, make all the laws, execute laws, and interpret the laws as they see fit. Limited monarchy. Not malarkey, monarchy. This is what the King and Queen of England is. A limited monarchy. Laws are created by a separate body. And in England, it's Parliament. Laws are interpreted by a separate judicial body. That's the courts. Laws are executed and enforced by the monarch. And probably more importantly, depends on your perspective, the monarch is not above the law. He can't go and execute whoever he wants. He can't tax one person X amount arbitrarily and tax somebody else, one of his friends, less. He has to execute the laws equally, as the legislative body has intended. The King and Queen of England, of course, right now we only have the Queen. When Queen Elizabeth dies, then her son, Prince Charles, will become king. I assume his second wife will become queen. While they are king and queen, virtually have no power. They are, by all purposes, just royal figureheads. They don't sign anything to make a law. They don't even execute the law. That's the prime minister that does that. They are a figurehead. They look pretty and spend a lot of money. Now, does that mean that they have no role to play? No. There's a lot of things that's discussed with the Queen. The Prime Minister has routine visits with the Queen. But the Queen really only has power because the people in Parliament allows her to. But it's not much. And there just really isn't much that she has any control over. That's about it. Yep. She is close to 100, I think. She was the queen during World War II. Yeah. Her husband died in the 50s. That's how long she's been in rule. I think she might be one of the oldest or one of the longest ruling queens. Or maybe even of all the monarchs. So it's possible that her son, Prince Philip, will die before her. He's got to be 70-something. And a lot of people would like to see him abdicate the throne and give it to his son. Not Harry, William. I think it's Prince William is his name. Kate and William. That was William. Or excuse me, that was Harry, that's right. That's the younger one. He'll probably never be king because they've got a son. Yeah, somebody would have to take that whole family out before Harry ever becomes king. So, yep. So legitimate monarchs are restrained by a constitution, and those monarchs that are restrained by a constitution is called constitutional monarchies. All right, so let's take a look at the sovereign's title. The sovereign is the person like the monarch, or the king, queen, czar. They are the sovereign. They have full control. There's two basic classes: hereditary and elective. The sovereign's title in England is hereditary. In other words, you're never going to be king or queen unless you're born into it. Prince Philip will become king because he is the firstborn of that family, of Queen Elizabeth. William will be the king because he is the firstborn of Prince Philip. And if he does not survive long enough to be king, or he dies as king, then his firstborn will become king. Whoops, sorry. Let me go back. You also could have an elective monarchy. How do you think this person gets into becoming a monarch? He's elected. That's right. What is probably the biggest well-named person that's an elective monarchy? That's elective monarch, excuse me. Or how about an organization that is elective monarchy? Any idea? Today. Huh? United States? Do we have any monarchs? Oh gosh, no. Founding fathers we would have killed a monarch. Russia? Nope. Huh? Anybody in here Catholic? The Pope? The Catholic Church? Let's go back to hereditary. I've already talked about the sovereign obtains the title to the throne by his birth. Here we are, the oldest son. If no son, then the oldest daughter begets the crown. Edward VI of England was crowned at the age of 9. Here he is at 9, taking his first painting after becoming king. He had 2 older sisters. As you can imagine, ladies, if you have a younger brother, how would you like to have your younger brother dictating to you and you having to bow to him? They did. He's 9 years old, probably a brat, spoiled one at that, maybe still wet in the bed. And now he is king. William I, this is what I have read. I'm not saying this to be fact. This is my understanding to be the truth, though. That William I, also known as William the Conqueror, invaded England in 1066, which I know in fact was true. He defeated the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings, and William's descendant has sat on the British throne ever since. Uh-huh. And every British monarch has claimed the right to the throne by birth as a result. Huh? Ever since William I. Not this guy. This is Edward VI. William I was a Frenchman. He's from Normandy, the Kingdom of Normandy. Those of you who are in U.S. history with me will find that out today. Elective monarchy. As I said, they are elected to the throne by subjects or by the subjects they represent. Malaysia Supreme Head of State is elected to a 5-year term. These are just some examples. The king is chosen by the Royal Council of the Throne from candidates of royal blood in Cambodia. And the Pope is elected by a conclave by the College of Cardinals in the Holy See. Typically, the Pope is one of the members of the college. As you can see, it's a pretty tight-knit group that they choose to rule. We will stop here for the day.